With our mental powers, we should be able to perceive the swiftness with which all things pass away, and how soon they are forgotten. We should be able to observe the real nature of the emotions we experience, those which are frightening or pleasurable, or loudly thrust upon us with pride. How quickly all these things decay and disappear. But we must also understand the nature of dying. If carefully contemplated, we realize that death is merely a process of nature. Indeed, it's a positive contribution to nature's well-being, something that only children are afraid of. You know, as an Oxford student poring over academic texts well into the small hours, these words never really meant a thing to me. That is, until I visited ENFORD. A chilly January morning in the ancient settlement of ENFORD in the heart of Wiltshire. We're 7 miles north of Amesbury. And here I am at the southern facade of All Saints' Church. With its dull grey architecture, an imposing sight. This church originally had a spire. Tragically, in 1817 it was struck by lightning, crashing down into the south porch, which was completely destroyed. Imagine the horror of that sight. "8:45 in the morning, but the clock here stuck on 9:10. Time is literally standing still here. Isn't there a strange melancholy about this church's beauty? Imagine the chattering of the masons who worked on it, and the clanking and squeaking of primitive machinery and scaffolding, pulleys. Truly a testament to their handiwork. This building has stood here as proud as ever for the best part of 1,000 years. This is of course the porch, rebuilt during the massive restoration work after the collapse of the spire. The stonework used is that of the original. The restoration is impeccable, all except for this holy water stoop, which was installed the wrong way round. A stark, austere church, very little decoration, and these walls seem to trap the midnight air. As a result, it's freezing. I can already sense the wonderful acoustic of this church. The first thing that catches my eye in the north aisle, the funeral beer purchased by the villagers in 1900. There's one Latin phrase conjured up by the sight of that beer, and that, my friends, is memento mori. Above the chancel arch, a majestic coat of arms dated 1831, showing the village's loyalty to King William IV. These were hugely popular during this period. They also added colour to the church. And from the same spot, notice how the altar is slightly out of line, looking at the church dead centre. You'd think that was the result of some kind of subsidence, like we see at Winchester Cathedral, but it's actually deliberate. This allegedly is a symbol of Christ's head hanging to one side on the cross. And beyond, a plain, undecorated chancel with its own very unique acoustic. And just come through here. This mysterious part of the church is older than it might seem, possibly medieval. Could have been used as a chapel of some sort. It's now a sacristy. Returning to the nave, and turning into this huge north aisle, which originally housed the school. The children would have come in through this entrance over here, now blocked, and this is where they would have had their lessons. These children must have been terribly frightened by this very haunting memorial to Mrs. Baskerville, who died in 1615. Her figure is turned away from us. A fairly terrifying sight. And we complete our tour in the west end of the church, underneath the tower. There was originally a gallery here up until 1893, very common in village churches. This one allegedly held 50 children, 12 singers, and an organ. The only thing that remains is this fragment of the seating. The organ that stood in the gallery here wasn't the kind played by a live organist. It was actually a barrel organ. That's the pipe organ equivalent of a player piano. Wooden barrels with music encoded onto them would have been fitted into this instrument, and then somebody would have pumped it or ground it, and that would have produced the music. So you only have as many tunes as you have barrels. In the context of street musicians who also used barrel organs, they could have had a trained animal, hence the phrase organ grinder and monkey. You know where all this is leading, viewers. What happened to that barrel organ? Well, it's still here. It's been adapted to be played by a live organist and recited in the south aisle. Let's go and investigate. So here we have an organ by J.S. Eagles, built in 1859 for this church, firstly in the gallery and then subsequently installed here and converted to be played by a live organist. Let me give you a tour around this instrument. Very small and quaint. By the way, I've taken off a layer, not because I'm warm, but because otherwise you'll see me amongst a sea of red. Or shall I say, you won't see me. Come round to the side, you can just see the dimensions of this organ. It's very, very small. That there is the new electric blower. You can hear it buzzing away. And around the back, the original pumping handle probably still works just fine. You hear stories about midnight mass where the electricity goes and the organ has to be pumped, and you would enter to tune it by making your way in behind these wooden panels. Think of the time that this has stood here in this church. 2 world wars, huge fluctuations in temperature, so it would be amazing to see how it sounds after all this time. So, let's take a look at the stops on this particular organ. First of all, the open diapason. These pipes up on the facade, a very unique tone to the pipe organ. Open diapason does not mimic any other orchestral instrument. It's purely a pipe organ sound. Open means the pipes are open-ended, so they have a bold, full sound. And diapason means through all the notes. In other words, it goes all the way up to the top of the keyboard. The equivalent stop an octave higher, in other words, the pipes are half the length, therefore half the pitch, is the principal. And finally, half the length again, the 15th. Those stops make up what we call the chorus. It's what we use for hymn playing. It's how the organ gets its power. Why would an organ layer different octaves like that? Well, the reason is it reinforces something called the harmonic series. When you hear a single note, you think you're just hearing one note. Actually, what you're hearing is a series of overtones above that note, different frequencies that vibrate when that note is played. The organ stops reinforce those frequencies, and that's how an organ can be powerful enough to reach the back of the church. For me, those upper stops are just slightly out of tune, so I'd rather not use them. Just listen to this. A slightly ugly grating sound purely because of the tuning. It is January, it's cold. This thing has had to put up with a lot of different temperatures. But the organ sounds just as lovely using the 8 and 4 foot pitches. And how about a great Epiphany hymn, Brightest and Best? As well as the full chorus, this organ has some very charming, quieter stops. Dulciana, meaning sweet. Stopped diapason, which is a wooden form of diapason with a stopper at the end to make the sound more muffled. A clarabella, which is another form of flute. And finally, a corollaphon, very unusual stop. Very popular during the Victorian period. The name comes from the Greek words meaning pipe, horn, and voice. These stops work best played together. This organ also has a pedal board, but it's not a normal organ pedal board that's big with large pedals. This one's tiny. In fact, all it does is draw the notes down from the keyboard. It's a practical aid to help the organist play when there are larger stretches required. Completely straight. Remember Wilsford last week with its curved, large pedal board? This is nothing like that. Personally, I wouldn't use it, just because I'd have to relearn my organ technique. Normally the C pedal would be right in the middle of that pedal board, but here it's offset to the left. You see this design on other organs like the Bevington organ that I visited at Rockbourne, and also Martin. They both have pedal boards like that. When I saw that this organ had this kind of pedal board, I knew I'd need a completely different kind of repertoire. I've never had a piano lesson. I'm purely an organist. They're two completely different instruments. An organist relies on their feet. They don't need to look down at the notes. It's like the way a cellist plays. They don't look at their left hand. Whereas a pianist plays everything with their hands. They're used to large stretches. So this is slightly challenging for me, playing all this music without my feet. One of my favourite parts of filming these videos is choosing the music that I'm going to play for you. I normally don't decide until I get here because I have to assess my surroundings, the acoustic of the church, the memorials, the age of the church, the colour of the stone. It all contributes to how I feel about these buildings, especially the pipe organ. Every organ is different. They're all built by individual builders, all built bespoke for the church. They all have different tone qualities and they all inspire different kinds of music. It's just beginning to rain here, and combined with the imposing architecture of this church, the stark decoration in the chancel, the funeral bier, I'm inspired to play something mournful and ancient. William Byrd, who died 400 years ago, the so-called father of English music. He wrote a piece called the Pavan for the Earl of Salisbury. The Earl of Salisbury was Robert Cecil, one of his patrons, who, whilst making the journey back from Bath to seek a cure for his terrible illness, died in Marlborough, just 25 miles north of here, in 1612. Within months, Bird's piece had been published. In its restrained and haunting beauty, it seems to me the perfect musical representation of this building. The rain is pouring down outside, but it's not dark yet. There's time for just one more piece, for me to communicate to you the essence of this building. And my inspiration? A memorial in the gloom of the South Aisle. While I was looking around the church, I discovered this. It's not written in any church history, but to me it speaks in a language more poignant than I've ever seen in a village country church. Sacred to the memory of Julia, wife of John Stagg Cuss, who departed this life the 18th of May, 1851, aged 28 years. I know that my Redeemer liveth. This tablet has been erected by her afflicted husband as a slight testimony of his love and gratitude to one of the best of wives and parents, and a memorial of the genuine worth and many virtues that adorned her character.